I was crouched by a trash bin, pulling out half-eaten bread, when my sister's car pulled up. She didn't speak, just opened the door. That night, I slept in a $1 million condo. The next morning, she handed me a letter, a transfer, $9 million, all in my name. But peace didn't last. My children came crawling back, the same ones who drained my savings and threw me out like garbage. They said they missed me, said they wanted to help. But this time, I wasn't a mother. I was a storm, and they had no idea what was coming. I didn't even taste the bread. It was stale, cold, crusted over. But my hands moved on their own, tearing at it, stuffing little pieces into my mouth while I crouched low behind the trash bin. I wasn't hiding. Not really. But I wasn't ready to be seen either. Not like that. My back ached, my knees burned. And then I heard tires, slow, expensive tires. Her door didn't slam. Her heels didn't click. She just stood there, quiet, still, and I couldn't lift my head. Not until I saw the toe of her shoe, near mine. Then the door opened. No words, just heat from the car's interior and the silence between sisters. That night, I slept wrapped in cotton sheets and still smelled like trash. The next morning, she gave me the envelope. But you know all that already. This isn't a story about rescue. It's about what happened after, what crawled back in after I thought I was safe. It started 3 days later. I had just figured out how to use the espresso machine Lydia installed in the condo. I was drinking something called a double ristretto, whatever that meant. And then the concierge buzzed me. They were downstairs. Brian and Darlene. I don't remember walking to the mirror, but I remember staring at my own face. I looked soft, the kind of soft that used to make me easy to move around, to dismiss. But I wasn't that woman anymore. So I buzzed them up. They came with flowers, white lilies, too elegant, too funeral-like. I knew Darlene picked them. Brian wouldn't know a lily from a lamppost. They smiled, tight, practiced smiles. Brian opened his arms. I didn't move, so he dropped them and said I looked amazing, said the place was beautiful, said he missed me. I let them in, not because I trusted them, but because I needed to see how far they would go. Darlene sat on the edge of the couch like she didn't want to wrinkle anything. Brian moved through the condo like he still owned it. They made small talk, asked how I was adjusting, asked if I was eating enough, if Lydia was around, where the money came from. I didn't answer most of it. Eventually, Brian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, same posture he used when he wanted to seem sincere. He started talking about family, about mistakes, about second chances. He reached for my hand. I let him take it. He said he was sorry, that what happened that night was out of character, that they were both stressed, that Darlene's mother had been sick, that I caught them on a bad day. I pulled my hand back. That's when Darlene spoke. Her voice was soft, but she was the sharp one. Always had been. She said they wanted to reconnect, that they had talked, that they missed having me in the house, that they were ready to help, to take care of me. That word again, take care. That was the same thing she said to me before she changed the locks. The same thing she whispered when I was sick and asked her to pick up my prescriptions, but she said we should let nature take its course. She offered tea. Brian nodded along. He said they were turning a new page. I asked them if they were thirsty. They said yes. So I made them wait. I stood in the kitchen and poured water slowly. Let them sit with their kindness. Let it stew. Let them get comfortable. When I came back, I set the glasses down and said nothing. Brian asked if I wanted to come stay with them for a while. Just a weekend. Just so we could talk things through. I smiled. That scared them more than if I had screamed. The next morning, there was a note under my door. Handwritten. Brian's handwriting. It said he had a friend who could help with financial planning, just in case I ever wanted advice. Said I should never feel alone with all these new responsibilities. 2 days later, they brought homemade cookies and a folder labeled Emergency Preparedness Packet. Inside were forms, power of attorney templates, health directives, banking access. They called it proactive care. I called it bait. And just like that, it began again. But here's the thing. They didn't know I was recording. From the first knock on my door, I had the recorder tucked under the hallway table. Every visit, every word, every paper they placed on the counter. It was all there. Because this time, I wasn't just a mother. I was a witness. And I had learned something the hard way. Forgiveness means nothing without accountability. So I waited. And if you've ever waited like that, you'll understand the kind of stillness I'm talking about. The kind where your bones hum with memory, where your silence is louder than their shouting, where the storm is not in the sky, but inside your chest. They thought I was back where I belonged, but I had already buried the woman they betrayed, and what was left had teeth. I knew they wouldn't wait long. Parasites don't rest when they smell blood. And Brian, he was never one to let a dollar slip past him, especially if it had my name on it. On the third morning, Darlene came alone. She brought croissants, warm from the bakery. She had curled her hair, wore a soft blue blouse, the same color she used to say made me look tired. She smiled like we were old friends. I didn't invite her in. She stepped in anyway. She placed the bag gently on the kitchen counter, then glanced around the condo like she was trying to refamiliarize herself with the layout. Her voice was pleasant, light. She asked how I'd been sleeping, if I'd been getting outside. I let her talk, let her fill the silence. She was always better when she thought she was in control. Then came the reason she was there. She said she'd spoken with a resource coordinator from a senior advocacy center. Said it would be smart to review my documents now that things were changing. She brought a pamphlet. She called it a kindness. I didn't touch it. Later that afternoon, Lydia dropped by. She saw the pastry bag in the trash, narrowed her eyes, and said nothing. She sat at the kitchen island, sipped the espresso I made for her, and waited. So I told her. Every word. About Darlene's solo visit. About the pamphlet. About the timing. Lydia listened, then pulled her phone out of her purse. She sent 2 texts. Then she asked me if I still had the envelope from the emergency packet Brian brought. I did. I handed it to her. She opened it like a surgeon preparing for a cut. Inside was a pre-filled power of attorney form, a healthcare proxy, and a bank authorization. The return address was typed, but the phone number was handwritten. She took a picture of it, then burned the entire packet in a small metal bowl she pulled from her tote bag. That's when I knew she had done this before. The next morning, Samuel Ortiz arrived. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a button-down, sleeves rolled up, a legal pad in one hand, coffee in the other. He nodded once at me like we had already met. He sat down across from me and opened his pad. He had a list. He asked if I was ready to make things permanent. I said yes. That afternoon, we went over everything. The condo title, the savings, the accounts Lydia had set up, the backup accounts she hadn't told me about yet. Samuel explained it all in plain terms, no condescension. He didn't speak slowly like some people do with women my age. He was calm, fast, and sharp. We signed the first set of documents that evening. I gave him full permission to initiate the formation of a non-profit trust under my name. Not for show, for protection. A structure they couldn't touch. We named it the Gloria Justice Fund. I didn't smile when I signed it. I just exhaled. That night, I slept with the door locked and the lights off. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew it would be the last quiet night for a while. The next day, Brian came back. This time he brought flowers again. Yellow roses, my least favorite. He didn't know that. He never asked. He came alone. He stood at the door, gave me that half-tilted head of his, the one he used in courtship years ago when he was trying to win over Darlene's father. He said he just wanted to talk. I let him in, not because I had softened, because I was recording. He didn't sit right away. He lingered, looked out the window, said the view was incredible. Then he launched into a story about how hard things had been lately. The economy, the stress, the pressure of raising kids in a world like this. How he missed me. How Darlene had cried after seeing me. How he regretted everything. Then he paused, said he had brought something to help us move forward. He opened his bag and pulled out a folder. Inside there were 2 documents. One was a family care agreement. The other was an asset protection plan. He used those exact words. I nodded like I was considering. He walked me through each page, pointing out clauses he didn't understand himself. He said they were just for ease, for emergency access, for shared responsibilities. He said it would make him sleep better at night. I looked at him and said one word. Sure. He beamed. The next morning, Samuel filed the foundation paperwork. Lydia paid the rush fee to have it processed within 24 hours. The accounts were locked under the non-profit's legal protection clause. Any attempted access from an outside entity would trigger a flag and a report. That evening, I placed the yellow roses in the trash and set the folder on my kitchen table. Then I called Lydia and told her to prepare the press release. Because if they were going to come for me again, they needed to know. This time, I was armed. It didn't take long for word to spread. Clearwater wasn't a small town, but the right whisper could still echo, and Lydia knew how to plant the kind of whispers that grew roots fast. The press release went live the following afternoon, simple, clean, and direct. A quiet announcement that the Gloria Justice Fund had been formally registered as a non-profit. Mission: to support elderly women facing financial abuse by their families. The story wasn't about me, not yet, but it was coming. The real storm broke that evening during the community dinner Lydia hosted at the tower's event space. It wasn't meant to be fancy. Just drinks, small plates, a few polite introductions. A soft way to welcome me into the building without drawing too much attention. She invited neighbors, the building manager, even Officer Ramirez, who patrolled the complex every week. And of course, she invited Brian and Darlene. That was her idea. Mine was something else. I arrived at 6 sharp, wearing a dark navy blouse and the earrings Charles gave me for our 30th anniversary. I hadn't worn them in years. I wanted something that grounded me, something that reminded me who I used to be, before I let myself be reduced. People were already mingling. Soft jazz played over hidden speakers. The windows glowed with sunset, bouncing light off the ocean. Lydia moved through the room like a conductor, steering conversations, setting pace. She didn't hover near me, but I could feel her presence from across the space. Always aware, always watching. Brian and Darlene walked in 20 minutes later. They looked polished, smiling too hard. Darlene wore cream. Brian wore a blazer I didn't recognize. They greeted people easily, like they belonged there. They moved toward me slowly, deliberately, like actors waiting for their cue. When they reached me, Brian opened with a compliment, said I looked strong, said he was proud of me. Darlene reached for my hand. I didn't stop her. She said the condo was beautiful, asked if I liked the view, said it felt like a second chance for all of us. I nodded once, then stepped aside. That was Samuel's cue. He was already there, dressed like one of the guests, holding a glass of white wine and wearing a neutral smile. He moved in, greeted Brian like they were old friends, then asked if they could sit for a moment to go over something. Brian hesitated. I stayed silent. Darlene nodded politely. They followed Samuel to the seating area near the window. Lydia gave me a slight nod from the far end of the room. I walked over to the small podium near the buffet table and cleared my throat. The room quieted. I didn't speak loudly. I didn't need to. I said thank you to everyone for coming. Said it meant something for me to be welcomed like this. Said the past few months had been difficult. That transitions were rarely smooth. That sometimes, when families broke apart, the pieces didn't always fit back the same way. And then I turned to Brian and Darlene. I said their names out loud. The air shifted. I told the room that I believed in accountability, that love wasn't real without truth, and that sometimes people needed to see what that looked like. Then I clicked the small remote Lydia had given me earlier. A projector screen dropped behind me, silent and smooth. The first video began. It showed Brian sliding a folder across my kitchen table. His voice, calm, rehearsed, outlining how helpful it would be for him to have access in case of emergencies. The footage was clear, the audio sharper than I expected. Next came Darlene's visit, her voice describing a senior care coordinator, offering advice on how I could slowly shift my decision-making to people who had more capacity. And then a third clip, the one from the concierge camera. Brian telling the desk clerk that I was struggling, that I might need someone to check in if I missed a wellness call. That one cut deepest. When the final clip ended, the room was silent. I let it sit for a full breath. Then I spoke again. I said this wasn't revenge, it was protection, that I had spent a lifetime swallowing disrespect in the name of peace, that this wasn't just about me. It was about every woman in that room who had ever been called difficult for speaking up, every mother who had been treated like property, every widow who had been left out of the decisions once her husband was gone. Brian stood up. His voice cracked. He tried to speak. Samuel raised a hand gently. Darlene's face was frozen. Lydia took one step forward. Not to threaten, just to anchor. Samuel turned to the crowd and announced that all evidence presented was verified, time-stamped, and part of a formal legal record. That the Gloria Justice Fund had been secured against manipulation by any party, familial or otherwise. That fraud against it would be treated as a federal offense. Brian said one word. It wasn't sorry. It was my name, like a plea, like I could undo what had already begun. I looked him in the eye, then turned my back. People didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just stood there, stunned, absorbing it, letting the story fill the corners of their own memories. The rest of the evening moved in a blur. Brian and Darlene left within minutes. No goodbyes, no cleanup. Just vanished into the elevator, as if distance could erase what had just happened. I stayed until the lights dimmed, until Officer Ramirez came by and said it was a powerful thing I'd done, until Lydia touched my arm and said softly that it was time to go home. That night, I sat in the living room alone. No wine, no music, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of waves through the window. I didn't feel triumphant, not yet. But I didn't feel erased either. And that, for now, was enough. 2 days after the dinner, The silence returned. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that wraps you up in safety. It was the tight, still kind. The kind that follows embarrassment. The kind that means something is building. Brian didn't call. Darlene didn't text. But Lydia noticed a silver sedan parked across the street from the building 2 mornings in a row. Same driver, same license plate. Just sitting there, engine running, sunglasses on. She flagged it immediately. By noon, Samuel had called in a favor. A contact of his, someone in the county clerk's office, confirmed a request had been filed late the previous evening. A formal inquiry into the non-profit's structure. Someone wanted to know how the Gloria Justice Fund had been established, who had control, and whether there had been any undue influence in its formation. The request wasn't random. It was deliberate, and it came from a third-party law firm out of Jacksonville, one that had, just last year, been fined for their role in a guardianship abuse case. Samuel and Lydia met me in the condo that afternoon. Lydia didn't say much. She paced. Samuel sat me down at the kitchen table and unfolded a copy of the clerk's report. At the bottom of the form, in small print, was a name I knew too well, Darlene Connors Hanford. She had submitted the inquiry under her maiden married hyphenate, likely hoping I wouldn't see it for what it was. But I did, and it didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was what came next. 3 days later, a man showed up at my door, late 40s, polo shirt, clipboard in hand. He introduced himself as part of a private elder services audit and said he was conducting friendly interviews to ensure community members were aware of their legal options as they aged. He smiled too much. He kept glancing at my living room wall like he expected to see cameras. I didn't let him in. I took his card, closed the door, and locked it. Then I called Lydia. By the end of the day, we had a name, a company, and a list of previous clients who had also been targeted by the same group. All of them women. All of them over 70. All of them with money someone wanted to get their hands on. That evening, Samuel filed a formal complaint with the Department of Elder Affairs and requested that the non-profit be placed on an internal protection watch. Not because we feared the fund would be touched, but because we knew what was coming next. They couldn't access the money directly, so now they would try to discredit me. The following week, a packet arrived in the mail. 6 pages, carefully worded, coded phrases, concerned language. An unsigned letter claimed that I was being manipulated by Lydia, that my recent decisions were uncharacteristic, that I was exhibiting signs of cognitive decline and confusion, that I had alienated my family and was potentially being exploited by an outside party. The letter was written as if by a friend, but I had no doubt who had written it. Samuel had it analyzed. He compared the phrasing to previous emails we had intercepted between Darlene and her financial advisor. 4 matching phrases, same punctuation style, same misuse of commas. It was her. That week we stopped playing defense. Lydia met with a reporter from a local news outlet and shared our documentation. The fundraiser dinner, the videos, the inquiry, the letter. She offered no embellishment, only facts. The article went live 3 days later. The headline was simple: Local woman fights back against quiet financial abuse. They used a cropped photo of me at the community event, holding a cup of tea and smiling slightly. I hadn't known someone took it, but it captured something I hadn't felt in a long time. Presence. Authority. The piece didn't name Brian or Darlene directly, but the story was clear. It detailed how senior citizens are often isolated, gaslit, and slowly erased through legal processes dressed up as care. The comments section lit up. People shared stories. People offered donations. People called the hotline Lydia had set up on the foundation's temporary site. And then came the tipping point. The Florida Attorney General's office reached out. Someone in their department had flagged the article and forwarded it to the Elder Protection Division. They wanted to review our case, not just because of what had happened to me, but because it matched a larger pattern. Samuel handed over everything: the recordings, the emails, the footage from the lobby camera, the documentation of the inquiry, the name of the man who showed up with the clipboard, the audit form with Darlene's hyphenated signature. The AG's office took it seriously. And just like that, the wind shifted, not in a gust, not in a storm, but in a stillness, like the tide before it turns. 2 days later, Darlene called. I didn't answer. The voicemail was short. She said she never wanted to hurt me, that things had gotten out of hand, that she missed the way things used to be. Her voice cracked near the end, but I had heard her lie enough times to know when it wasn't real. That same night, Brian showed up at the building. He didn't come upstairs, but Ramirez, the security guard, told me he stood outside the lobby for nearly 40 minutes before walking back to his car. No message, no apology, just absence. The kind they had once forced on me. Now it was theirs. But I wasn't done. That weekend, Lydia arranged a meeting with the director of a statewide women's foundation. We talked about creating a partnership, expanding the fund's reach, using my case to push for better elder protection legislation. They wanted me to speak at their annual summit. I said yes. Not because I liked microphones, but because I knew there were women out there who didn't have a Lydia, who didn't have a Samuel, who didn't have a moment to say no. I was going to give them that moment, or at least show them it existed. And maybe that was what terrified Brian and Darlene the most, that I wasn't afraid anymore, that I wasn't going to quietly fade, that I had become louder than their whispers and stronger than their shame. The silence didn't hold for long, not after the article, not after the hotline calls, not after the Attorney General's office put their weight behind it. It started small. A business blog mentioned the foundation, then a legal podcast picked it up. The episode was short, but sharp. A former judge from Sarasota outlined how elder abuse didn't always come with bruises or broken windows. Sometimes it came in the form of sweet smiles and notarized documents. Sometimes the thief lived in your family photos. By the end of the week, the foundation's temporary inbox had over 200 emails. Not all of them were kind. Some accused me of making it up, said no son would do that, said I had probably hidden the money from my family out of spite. Those didn't bother me. People cling to illusions when the truth threatens them. But most of the messages came from women, older women, some with stories almost identical to mine, others still in the middle of it, trying to hold on to their homes, their pensions, their dignity. One woman wrote that her daughter had slowly taken over her mail, then her accounts, then her medication. She said she now asked for permission before spending her own money. She said my story gave her the courage to stop asking. I read every message, some twice. But I didn't respond. Not yet. I wasn't finished writing my own story. By the following Tuesday, Samuel received notice that Brian had missed 2 mortgage payments on the office property he managed. Apparently, word of the foundation had reached his investors, the ones who liked clean reputations and quiet families. 2 clients pulled out in the same week. A third froze their contract. Darlene was next. She had been under review for a licensing renewal. A member of the ethics committee forwarded her name to the advisory board with a flagged status: potential legal exposure due to financial coercion. It didn't mean immediate revocation, but it meant scrutiny. And in her line of work, scrutiny was as good as a lock on the door. Lydia told me this over lunch. We were sitting at a small table outside the bakery down the block. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that doesn't ask for anything. She had brought her tablet, slid it across to me, and pointed to the digital headlines. Brian's name wasn't mentioned directly, but the office name was, and people talk. She said nothing for a while, neither did I, because neither of us needed to. We just watched as the tide kept pulling. That evening, I received a certified letter. It came in a flat white envelope, no return address. But I recognized the notary seal. Inside were copies of 3 forms: a rescindment notice, a cease and desist, and a personal letter. Brian had written it, or at least his lawyer had. The tone was professional, calculated. Said he no longer wished to contest my choices. Said he hoped the situation could de-escalate for the benefit of all parties. Said he wished me peace. He didn't mention the money. He didn't mention the abuse. He just folded his guilt into legal language and mailed it with tracking. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Ella. She had been helping at the foundation part-time, organizing files, responding to inquiries, and keeping the paperwork tidy. She was sharp, patient, and she never asked more than necessary. I told her I wanted to do something different. Not a press conference, not another dinner, something quieter. Ella suggested we visit the local library, said the women's group there had been using one of the back rooms for support meetings. Some of the women had read the article. Some had started following the foundation online. We went the next morning. 10 women sat in folding chairs, all older, all alert. Their faces were calm, worn. Some held notebooks. Others just sat with their hands folded in their laps. One wore a cardigan too thick for the weather. Another had a scar along her jawline that caught the light when she turned her head. They didn't ask for my story. They already knew it. So I asked for theirs. And what they told me didn't shock me. A woman said her grandson used her credit card without asking, then told her she must have forgotten she gave him permission. Another said her youngest son told the neighbors she had Alzheimer's just to gain power of attorney. One said nothing, just shook her head slowly, then looked down at her hands. I stayed 2 hours. I left feeling heavier and lighter at the same time. The kind of feeling that settles in the stomach, not the chest. That afternoon, Lydia arranged a brief with a legislative aide from Tallahassee. He wanted to explore the idea of a bill that would redefine family-related financial coercion under elder law. Nothing dramatic, nothing revolutionary, just language that would make it harder for predators to hide behind the word love. Samuel said it was the first step. Ella said she had never seen so many women look so ready to take their stories public. I said I wasn't going anywhere, not now. Not while the ones who tried to erase me still thought they could walk away clean. The following morning, Ramirez called, said there had been a noise complaint. Unit 7B, the one Brian used to rent for weekend visits. Apparently, he had stopped paying the lease, and the owner had filed for eviction. Ramirez said they had been trying to move things out quickly. He also said a few papers had been left behind. Legal drafts, printed emails, notes. He didn't say it, but I knew what he meant. He asked if I wanted him to shred them. I said no. I wanted a copy. Because sometimes the best way to close a chapter is to keep the page. And sometimes the people who hurt you the most leave behind their own confession. All you have to do is wait long enough to find it. The week after the letter arrived, the weight shifted again. Not because I answered it. I didn't. But because the silence that followed started to feel different. Less like retreat, more like preparation. I had seen that silence before. It was the kind that came before another attempt. The kind that meant someone was regrouping, finding a new angle, drafting a cleaner version of the same attack. Samuel agreed. He said nothing had landed legally, but he had a feeling we hadn't seen the last of it. That meant we needed to move first. Lydia called a meeting that Friday. It was just the three of us. No aides, no reporters, no staff from the foundation. She laid it out clearly. It was time to speak. Not just in print, not in small rooms with folding chairs and whispered stories. She wanted me to do a live interview, not a national network, not yet. Just a mid-range regional news outlet that had been covering elder advocacy for the last 2 years. They weren't flashy, but they were sharp. And more importantly, they were trusted. I said yes. Not because I liked cameras, but because I had spent a lifetime watching other people tell my story wrong. This time, I was going to tell it myself. The interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday, a local studio. Small, tidy. Lydia came with me but didn't sit in. Ella stayed behind to manage foundation calls and schedule follow-ups with the women's group. Samuel had already prepared the key facts and reviewed every potential question the anchor might ask. But I didn't use the notes. I sat under those lights with my back straight and my hands folded in my lap. And I told the truth. I told them what it felt like to have the people you raised turn you into a burden. What it felt like to hear the word responsibility in a tone that meant shame. What it felt like to be handed a folder with fine print and hidden power plays while someone smiled at you across your own kitchen table. I didn't name them. I didn't need to. The story wasn't about revenge, it was about refusal. Refusing to disappear, refusing to be signed over, refusing to let love be weaponized against me. The interview aired the next evening. By the time it finished, my phone had already buzzed 3 times. Ella called first. She said the foundation website crashed for a full 20 minutes from the traffic spike. The email box doubled by morning. Lydia forwarded me 2 media requests and a speaking invitation from the state university. I didn't answer any of them that night. I just sat in my living room and listened to the ocean. Because underneath the storm of noise, I could feel something else. Not pride, not victory, just relief. The kind that comes when the truth is no longer stuck behind your ribs. The next morning I found a package outside my door. No label. Inside was a manila folder and a short note, typed, anonymous. The note said nothing specific, just a line that read, "You're not the only one." The folder contained photocopies, legal documents, letters, screenshots, at least 3 different cases, all women, all seniors, each one with a familiar pattern. Someone they trusted slowly eroding their autonomy, not all through violence. Some with signatures, some with silence. The packet included one case from Clearwater, another from Naples, a third from a suburb outside Tampa. Samuel took one look and said it was a pattern, not just anecdotal, systemic. That afternoon, he forwarded the documents to his contact in the Attorney General's office. And just like that, what started as a personal reckoning began to shift into something larger. That weekend, the foundation hosted its first community legal clinic. We rented space at the old Civic Center. Ella coordinated with a team of volunteer attorneys, social workers, and healthcare advocates. Over 60 people showed up. Some came with full folders, others came with nothing but stories. I stood in the back most of the time, watched, listened. I didn't need to be front and center anymore, because the room was already filled with voices that mattered. Women asking direct questions. Women not apologizing for needing help. Women learning to document what used to be dismissed as bad memory or family tension. At one point, a woman in a grey blazer raised her hand and said she had been made to sign over her bank access after her son told her it would make things easier. She hadn't seen a bank statement in 6 months. The lawyer at the table next to her didn't flinch. She asked for dates, for names, for paperwork. That was the moment I realized the foundation wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to them, and I was fine with that. That evening, Samuel showed me the draft of the bill proposal. He and the legislative aide had worked through the language for weeks. The title was clean: Elder Financial Consent Reform. Nothing dramatic, just a new set of checks and balances. A requirement for third-party legal review when family members seek financial control over anyone over 65. Lydia said it was ambitious. Ella said it was overdue. I said it was necessary. And that was the end of it. The bill would take time, maybe months, maybe longer. But it had a name now, and so did I. No longer just someone's mother, no longer someone's patient, not even someone's survivor. Just someone who spoke, and finally was heard. 3 days after the bill draft was submitted, the first public hearing was scheduled. I didn't plan on attending, but Lydia insisted, said my presence would speak louder than any testimony, said I didn't even need to say a word. She was right. I didn't speak. But I sat in the front row, beside Ella and a woman named Rochelle, who had driven 2 hours just to be there. Rochelle had a folder in her lap, thick with court transcripts and doctor's notes. She gripped it like armor. That morning, I watched the legislative aide stand behind the podium and read the bill aloud. I listened to the committee chair nod slowly as each clause passed over the room. One clause mentioned dual signatures, another, mandatory waiting periods, another, outside verification before any financial power of attorney shift within a family unit. And every time a sentence landed, I watched Rochelle exhale a little slower. The ripple had begun. I didn't know that across town, Brian's bank accounts were being flagged for audit. Not because of me, because of his own investors. See, when news spreads quietly, people start asking questions. And when those questions lead to whispers about liability, people with money don't wait. They move it. Or worse, they freeze it. That's what happened. One of Brian's silent partners requested a review, not just of the current books, of every asset his firm had managed in the past 3 years, including mine. By the end of that week, Brian's financial power of attorney agreement over my name had been officially voided. It wasn't hard. Ramirez had already confirmed the signature page was incomplete, that it had never been fully witnessed. Brian must have thought I wouldn't notice, or that I wouldn't fight. But it turned out his laziness was louder than his cruelty. Once that was gone, so was his leverage. The bank removed his name from the condo registry. His shared access to the vehicle account was terminated. And then came the investors. 3 of them pulled their capital within 24 hours. 2 more demanded exit clauses be honored early. One asked publicly during a call whether Brian had knowingly exploited a vulnerable adult. The firm's board, what was left of it, held an emergency meeting. By the following Monday, Brian was no longer managing director. No farewell email, no transition speech, just a name quietly removed from the website. Darlene didn't call. She didn't need to. Her silence told me everything. But I heard from someone else. Kayla. She showed up outside the foundation office at noon on a Thursday. I recognized her immediately. Her posture, her scarf, her practiced smile. She asked for a moment. Just one. I stepped outside. She started talking before I had even closed the door behind me. Said she didn't know what Brian had done. Said she never wanted to be involved. Said she had tried to stop him. Tried to warn me. Said she was afraid of him. I didn't respond. Not once. Not even when she started crying. Because her tears weren't for me. They were for the position she'd lost. For the invitation that stopped coming. For the rooms that no longer opened when she arrived. She handed me an envelope, said it was from Brian. I didn't take it. I nodded toward the bench down the street, told her she could leave it there. She did. She walked away. He never followed up. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note, 2 pages. Apologies, excuses, and one sentence I read twice. I never meant to hurt you. That was the only honest part. He didn't mean to hurt me. He meant to control me, to use me, to erase me. The hurt was just collateral. That night I burned the letter. I sat on the balcony watching the smoke twist above the railing, and I felt nothing. Not triumph, not rage, just distance and clarity. The next morning, the local paper ran a story. Headline: Retired Widow's Lawsuit Forces Financial Reform in South Florida. They printed my name in bold, printed a photo of me sitting at the foundation clinic, listening to one of the speakers. I didn't recognize the moment they'd captured, but it looked calm. Later that week, Ella mentioned that someone from a national radio show had inquired. Not for a dramatic story, for a series. Something about dignity and power and the aging population. I said maybe, not now. She smiled, said we had time. Lydia started drafting the public education packet we'd mail out through community centers and local clinics. Samuel began coordinating with pro bono law firms who wanted to offer monthly seminars. The ripple had become a wave, and I didn't need to steer it anymore. I just needed to keep standing. Because every woman who walked through our doors now carried her own folder. Every one of them had a voice, a name, and a reason not to disappear. And I had mine. Brian's life was quiet after that. No court battle, no scandal, just slow disassembly, no power of attorney, no access to real estate trusts, no ability to sign my name anywhere for anything. I made sure of that. And then I moved on. Because my story didn't end with his fall. It began with my rise. The days after Brian's quiet fall weren't filled with celebration. There was no grand closure, no final scene where justice was neatly wrapped. Just a long silence. It settled into the condo like dust. And I let it. Because even as I stood on firmer ground, something inside me had shifted. Not just anger, not just pain. Emptiness. For years, my world had been shaped by resistance. I had lived in defense mode, braced for the next letter, the next insult, the next legal loophole they might use. Now that the storm had passed, I wasn't sure what to hold anymore. Ella noticed first. She stopped me in the hallway one morning, gently took the planner from my hands, and asked if I had eaten breakfast. I hadn't. I told her I forgot. She gave me that look, the one people give when they care but know not to press too hard. I didn't want pity. I didn't even want comfort. What I wanted, what I craved, was a reason to move, to breathe, to start something that didn't begin as a defense. The foundation kept me busy. The media attention had shifted into something more stable, more constructive. Women were reaching out from other states now, some asking for help, others just saying thank you. But the thank yous didn't reach as deep as the pain had. Samuel called it a vacuum effect. Said once the body stops fighting, the mind doesn't know what to do with all the space. He offered to set me up with a therapist. I said yes. Not because I believed in therapy, but because I had tried everything else. The woman I met was named Rebecca, late 40s, silver-streaked hair, soft voice, but eyes like steel. She didn't start with questions. She started with silence. She waited for me to speak, and when I did, she didn't interrupt. She listened. That first session, I said things I hadn't told anyone, not even Ella, not even myself. I told her I still dreamt of that first morning in the condo. The way my sister looked at me, how quiet it was, how unreal it felt to have a key again. I told her I sometimes walked to the balcony and waited to feel like I deserved it. She didn't tell me I did. She told me that didn't matter. Deserve had nothing to do with it. I was alive, and I was here, and I could choose what came next. That sentence stayed with me for days. I repeated it while brushing my hair, folding laundry, slicing apples. I can choose what comes next. So I did. One morning, I woke up early. The sun had barely touched the windows, and I pulled the big envelope from the bottom of my dresser. It had been there for months, sealed. Inside were letters, handwritten, in thick black pen. Letters I had written to myself. After the bridge, before the condo, in the shelter. I had forgotten most of them. Some were barely legible, but they were mine, every word. One started with, "I don't know who I am anymore, but I miss her." Another, "If I die here, I hope the wind doesn't carry my name too far." And the last one, "You are not finished. You are simply hidden. Get up." I sat with those letters for an hour. I didn't cry. I just read them like they were postcards from a version of me that refused to quit. That afternoon, I asked Ella if she would help me digitize them. She scanned them one by one. We filed them under a new project name, Hidden, Not Broken. It started as a name for a writing group, just 5 women, all over 60, all survivors of financial abuse. We met every other Friday in the back room of the library. Each brought a single page. Sometimes it was a memory, sometimes a letter, sometimes a poem. And in that small circle, something began to mend. Not just in me, in all of us. There was Rosa, who wrote about being tricked into refinancing her house, and June, who hadn't spoken to her daughter since 2014, and Beatrice, who had burned every photo of her wedding, but still remembered the weight of the dress. No one gave advice, no one solved anything. We just wrote, and spoke, and witnessed each other. It was enough. One morning, after the group, I walked past the park on 3rd Street, the same place I used to sit when I had nowhere else to go, and I saw a woman there. Thin coat, duffel bag, eating crackers slowly like they might be her last. I didn't stare. I didn't interrupt. I just walked to the cafe across the street and bought 2 sandwiches, came back and handed them over without a word. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. That evening, I told Rebecca about it. She asked how it felt. I told her it felt like breathing, not saving, not rescuing, just breathing, a full circle. She smiled, said that was healing. I said maybe, but I still woke up at 4 a.m. sometimes, thinking I was back on the street. She said that might never go away, but it didn't mean I was broken. It meant I had survived something real. And now, I was living something new. That night, I slept for 7 hours straight, the first time in over a year. When I woke, I made coffee, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to. The air was cool, the condo quiet, and for once I didn't feel haunted by silence. I just sat. Still. Not hiding, not defending, just here. It was a Wednesday when the letter arrived. A manila envelope, thick with folded legal documents and a handwritten cover note from Brian. I didn't need to open it. I already knew what it was. The trust. The original family trust. The one I had signed decades ago when my late husband and I created it for the children, with clear instructions and protections. What I didn't know back then was that Brian had quietly amended it 2 years before Robert died, transferring the majority of assets into a separate holding. He did it under the guise of streamlining the estate, and somehow got Robert to initial it in a rush of hospital papers. Now that the damage was done and his reputation was burnt, he wanted to make things right. I placed the envelope on the table and walked away. There was no making things right, but I knew what I had to do. For weeks, I had stayed away from confrontation. I had chosen to rebuild rather than retaliate. But something shifted as I stared at that envelope. It was not vengeance I wanted. It was an end, a clean one, a final conversation. So I made the call. The receptionist at the rehab clinic where Brian had quietly checked himself in 3 weeks prior told me he was available that Friday. I asked for a private room, not for his comfort, for mine. I didn't want an audience. I didn't want sympathies. I wanted to see the man who had torn through my life like a storm, who had stolen, lied, manipulated, and walked away. Ella offered to drive me. I said no. This was mine to finish. The clinic was 2 hours north, tucked between eucalyptus trees and a wide gravel driveway. Clean, quiet, not a punishment, more like a retreat. I checked in with the front desk, handed over my ID, and waited. When Brian walked in, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not thinner, just less. Less presence, less sharpness in the eyes. The arrogance had drained from his face, and what remained looked like a man forced to sit with himself too long. He sat across from me, said nothing. Neither did I. Not at first. I looked at him the way you look at something long enough to stop fearing it. Then I began. I told him about the cold nights under the bridge, the days I wandered from shelter to shelter, watching people turn away. I told him about the moment my sister found me, and how I slept that first night, not from comfort, but exhaustion. Then I told him about the letter, the one he sent, buried in apologies and disclaimers. I told him I didn't care about the money, not anymore. Because money could be stolen, lost, drained. But what he took from me was something far more personal. My trust, my name, the way I was seen by my own family. He opened his mouth, tried to speak. I raised a hand, told him I wasn't done. I told him that forgiveness was never his to demand, and that I didn't come to reconcile. I came to finish what he started. I stood up, pulled a thin folder from my bag, and slid it across the table. Inside were the final documents for the new foundation. The name, the Hanford Dignity Trust. Not in honor of him, in defiance of him. The trust would be built entirely from the remainder of my assets. The condo, the investments, everything. Set up as an untouchable grant fund to support older women displaced or exploited by family manipulation. His name would never appear. Neither would mine. Only the stories. The women we helped would write under pseudonyms, publish anonymously, be heard without needing to be seen. He asked what that meant for his inheritance. I told him he never had one. He just stole what wasn't his, and now he would walk away empty. He asked if this was revenge. I said no. Revenge would mean I still wanted something from him. I didn't. I had nothing left to need from him. Not his apologies, not his guilt, not even his absence. Just this final act. He nodded, not with understanding, but resignation. The way someone nods when a door finally closes and they hear the lock click behind it. I left without another word. On the drive back, I took a longer route, wound through old neighborhoods, past the diner where Robert used to bring home cinnamon rolls, past the school where I once dropped Brian off, his backpack too big for his shoulders. I thought of those mornings, how proud I used to be, how much I poured into them. Then I let it go. Not the memory, just the weight. When I got home, Ella was waiting in the lobby. She had a small vase in her hand, white tulips. I told her it was done. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. We went upstairs. I sat at the writing desk and opened the ledger. I flipped to the first blank page, and for the first time in years, I didn't write about pain. I wrote about the women at the group, about Rosa's laughter, June's story about painting again after 30 years, Beatrice's new puppy. Simple things, small things. Proof that rebuilding wasn't just about surviving. It was about choosing softness again and again, even when the world had gone hard. That night, I made soup, not because anyone was coming over, just because it was raining, and I liked the way the steam rose in the kitchen. It had been 6 days since I left the clinic. 6 days of silence, not from inside me, but from the outside world. For once, no calls, no threats, no fake apologies from anyone in my family. It felt eerie, almost staged. But peace is a fragile thing when you've lived too long inside a storm. On the 7th day, it cracked. I was in the kitchen, slicing strawberries into a ceramic bowl, when Ella's voice echoed down the hall. "You're going to want to see this." I walked into the living room. She had the news playing on the muted TV, but it wasn't the broadcast she wanted me to focus on. She handed me her phone. A video, posted on a local gossip account, now going viral. It was Brian, leaning on a podium in some rented hotel ballroom. Camera lights in his face, a row of men in suits flanking him. Microphones everywhere. He was holding a press conference. The headline on the banner behind him read, "The Hanford Estate, Truth and Restitution." The video began with a rehearsed sigh. Then came the performance. He declared that he had discovered disturbing manipulations in his mother's recent financial activities. He said I had been heavily influenced by outside parties, that I was vulnerable, perhaps even suffering from memory loss. He insinuated that the new trust was fraudulent, that the funds were being funneled to anonymous shell organizations, that he, as her son, had a duty to intervene. Then came the real hook. He announced he had filed for emergency guardianship. Of me, of my assets, of my entire legal identity. The strawberries fell out of my hands and rolled across the floor. I didn't pick them up. Ella paused the video and looked at me. My heart wasn't racing. It was still, not frozen, focused. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This was war, and Brian was making his last move. I sat down slowly and pulled out the leather folder I kept tucked behind the bookshelf. Inside were the notarized documents I had prepared months ago. Power of attorney, advanced directives, medical evaluations, witness testimonies. Everything had been signed and sealed long before I even told Ella about the foundation. I wasn't careless. But Brian had power, influence, a media team, lawyers willing to rewrite truth for a price. He was trying to force my hand, paint me unstable, take back everything through the courts. He didn't just want the money. He wanted to erase me from my own story. I called Marion Rosenthal, the attorney who had helped structure the foundation. She had known this might come. Her voice was firm, measured. "Do not respond emotionally. Let me handle it." I agreed, then hung up. But I didn't sit still. That evening, I called Rosa from the group. She had worked in public radio for years before she retired, knew how to shape a story, how to control a narrative. I asked her if she could get me 10 minutes on a podcast, not to defend myself, but to speak plainly. By morning, she had it scheduled. We recorded that afternoon. Just me, a microphone, and a quiet studio. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I told my story, how I raised my children with little more than instinct and love, how I ended up homeless despite owning a home, how I rebuilt my life, not with revenge, but clarity, how women like me are erased in silence every day, not just by strangers, but by their own families. Then I read from my journal, not the angry entries, the quiet ones. The morning I planted basil on the balcony and watched it grow. The day Ella fixed the bathroom door without being asked. The night I cooked stew for the building security guard, who missed dinner because of a double shift. It wasn't an argument. It was a mirror. And the world listened. The episode hit 1 million streams in 2 days. Brian's team went silent. By the end of the week, Marion called with news. The judge had denied Brian's guardianship petition. The court cited premeditated fraud, lack of medical evidence, and conflict of interest. They also referred the case to the district attorney's office. Brian's attorneys jumped ship 2 days later. That should have felt like triumph. It didn't. Not yet. Because I knew this wasn't just about Brian. It was about the pattern, the comfort society gives to men who take, and the suspicion it casts on women who resist, especially when those women are older, especially when those women have money. The week after the court ruling, I sat on the rooftop garden with Ella. The city below buzzed like always, indifferent. But in the breeze, I felt something shift. Not safety, not celebration, just presence. I was here. I was not erased. Ella poured us tea. She didn't ask what I would do next, but I told her anyway. I wanted to start a storytelling series, not about trauma, but about resilience, real voices, real women, real beginnings. We'd call it Still Here. She smiled, then handed me a notebook. It was blank, just the way I liked it. I picked up my pen and began again. Dewey Day la Chung 11th, Ban Huan Chin, Viet Liên Mac, Bam Sat Yan Y Da Lu, Dung Dong Van và mạch cảm xúc của các chương trước. Chapter 11. Gloria Hanford. American English. Minimum 850 words. Full text, stored. The launch day came quietly. No ribbon cutting, no cameras flashing, no velvet ropes or red carpet. Just a small room inside a local community centre, folding chairs arranged in a circle, pitchers of lemon water on the side table. The walls were plain, beige, the ceiling lights flickering slightly as if unsure of their place. But to me, it felt perfect. It felt honest. Still, here wasn't born from a marketing team. It was born from silence. From the space women disappear into once their usefulness fades in the eyes of others. And now, it had a voice, or rather, many voices. We were about to open the door. Ella stood beside me, clipboard in hand, her energy steady but alert. Behind her, Rosa was checking the sound setup, the little mic on the podium already tested twice. Marion had sent flowers, pale yellow lilies in a chipped vase that used to sit in her office window. And the first group of women, our first speakers, our first listeners, were beginning to take their seats. No introductions, no fanfare. I stepped forward. My voice did not tremble. Good morning. My name is Gloria Hanford, and I am still here. That was all it took. One sentence, one heartbeat, and the room leaned in. I told my story, but not the courtroom version, not the one trimmed for press or podcasts or public defense. I told the version that lived in my bones. The night I slept in my car. The morning I watched my son sign away my house like it was a used appliance. The ache in my wrists when I scrubbed bathrooms for rent money. The silence in my phone for 3 years straight. And how one day someone saw me. And I remembered I was not done. When I finished, I didn't look for applause. Instead, I sat down and waited. The second woman stood up. Her name was Iris. She had been a teacher for 32 years, one divorce, two miscarriages, and a daughter who only called when she needed money. Her voice cracked when she spoke, but she spoke anyway. Then came Bernadette, then Lila, then Esther. Some whispered, some shouted, some wept. None of them hid, and that was how it began. The next 3 weeks blurred together. Word spread fast, from churches to libraries to small Facebook groups run by retirees. Ella built a digital newsletter. Rosa worked with a local station to record the sessions for radio. We didn't ask for donations, but they came anyway. Envelopes with handwritten notes, crumpled bills, gift cards. One woman mailed a check with a post-it. I waited 42 years to say this out loud. Thank you. Still Here grew roots. We had stories from women in trailer parks, from women in high-rise condos, from widows, from women still married but entirely alone. We had a woman who used to be a judge, and another who hadn't read since 8th grade. We had grief and laughter and rage and hymns sung without accompaniment. And through it all, I never mentioned Brian. Not once. He had vanished from the headlines. The guardianship bid had backfired so publicly, no lawyer would touch him now. His real estate firm had gone silent. Lawsuits started circling. But that was no longer my focus. Something better was happening. One evening, after our third recorded session, I received an email. It was from a producer at a national network. She had heard the podcast, read the blog Ella maintained, and wanted to interview me for a documentary series on women over 60 rewriting their legacies. I forwarded it to Marion. She called me instead of replying by email. Do you want this? I didn't hesitate. Yes, but not for me. For the others. 3 weeks later, they came to film. I wore a plain navy sweater and sat in front of the community garden where we hosted some of the outdoor sessions. The producer asked me to talk about justice. I spoke about presence. She asked me about power. I told her about listening, about the silence that follows a woman into every room once she's no longer fertile, or marketable, or soft-spoken. The segment aired during a Friday night prime slot. The phone rang off the hook the next morning, but one message stood out. It was a letter, handwritten, no return address. It read, "You ruined my inheritance, but I think you saved your soul." The handwriting was familiar. I folded it, placed it in the drawer with the basil seeds, and didn't look at it again. Some ghosts don't need exorcising. They need forgetting. Still, here became more than a circle. It became a movement. We added workshops, sessions on financial literacy, estate planning, assertiveness training, storytelling as healing. Women brought their daughters, some brought their sons. We didn't advertise, we didn't expand fast, but we grew strong. And one afternoon, as I sat with Rosa and Ella planning the full schedule, I realized something. I had spent years waiting for peace. It was never coming. What came instead was clarity. Peace can be taken away, but clarity stays, it grows, it roots, and it never apologizes. It was almost dusk when I stood at the back of the old farmhouse again. The air carried that kind of stillness only autumn knows. Leaves drifted down like whispers. The porch lights flickered on automatically. For a moment, I just stood there, watching the windows, the shadows, the roof I once paid for. And then I walked toward the door. I had asked Marion not to come. This was something I had to do alone. The door opened before I reached it. Brian stood there. He looked smaller, greyer, like someone had turned the volume down on him. We didn't speak right away. I stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath me like it used to. Same scent of lemon polish and dust. The house hadn't changed, only I had. I sat down on the edge of the couch. He followed, slow, careful. I waited. Finally, he spoke. I didn't know. That was all he said. I nodded. You didn't want to know. He looked away. I never meant to hurt you. You didn't need to. You just had to look the other way. Silence settled between us, but it wasn't the kind that swallows. It was the kind that reveals. He reached into a drawer, pulled out a crumpled envelope. Inside were snapshots. Me in the back of a shelter. Me sweeping the floor at a gas station. Me sitting alone on a bench. Photos I had never seen, taken by someone, somewhere. For what purpose, I couldn't tell. I looked at them, then at him. Why do you have these? He didn't answer, just looked ashamed, or maybe just empty. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I no longer needed to bleed to prove I had been wounded. I stood up. You will never understand what you took from me, but I've stopped needing that. I came here because I wanted to see if you still lived in the ruins you made. He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't ask for forgiveness. And for the first time, I didn't ache for either. I left the envelope on the table, and I walked out. The last thing I heard was the door closing behind me, no louder than a breath. Still, here didn't make headlines that month, but the waiting list doubled. We got invited to speak at 2 universities. A librarian from Alabama drove 16 hours just to sit in one of the circles. Marion helped us apply for non-profit status. Rosa was invited to co-produce a public radio series based on some of the sessions. Ella turned down a PR firm's offer and stayed on with us instead. And me? I bought a small house by the lake, not too far from the center, but far enough to sleep without noise. Some mornings, I sit on the porch with a warm cup and think about what it means to outlive your own story, to keep walking after the chapter ends, to write new ones, not out of revenge, but renewal. I don't check the headlines anymore. If Brian's company collapses, if his name vanishes from the social registers, it will happen with or without me watching. I've already watched enough. One afternoon, I got a letter from my sister's old lawyer. He'd been settling some of her final donations, distributing funds she'd never spoken about. Quiet gifts, silent legacies. Inside the envelope was a single line. This part is for you, in case you ever feel unseen again. It was a trust, just enough for still here to build a permanent home, no more borrowed rooms, no more folding chairs. We bought a small property, old brick, wide windows, a garden in the back, a tree so tall it leans over the roof like a grandparent keeping watch. We called it the Listening House, no plaque, no flashy nameplate, just a door that never locks. Because some stories can only be told when a door stays open. And mine? It's no longer about what I lost. It's about what I reclaimed. Not money, not houses, not revenge, but the right to exist loudly, fully, and without shame. That is the story now, and it's still being written. If you're still listening, thank you. Not just for staying, but for bearing witness. Maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe you're still in the middle of it. Wherever you are, I hope this story gave you something. Strength, clarity, or maybe just a reminder that you are not invisible. You're still here. And sometimes, surviving is the loudest rebellion. Let me know how this story made you feel. I'm listening.